referendum coming up. And so it may be who knows how much longer we're going to have this ward, but we may just have one more term, or we may continue depending on what the referendum is. So that's my role here in New Plymouth.
And how would you describe Māori wards? Anything to add to what Bonnie was saying? What exactly are they? What is their purpose within local government structure?
Yeah, I think ultimately it is to maintain a commitment to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and to make sure that we have a Māori voice at the table. And yes, we have the argument around, well, why can't you just stand in a general election or a general campaign to be able to stand as someone else in the community? But again, I think there's an obligation that we and a commitment that we as a country have to maintain a Māori voice, whether or not you're voted in or not, you're a representative of the tangata whenua of Aotearoa, of New Zealand.
Now, I think we need to do full disclosure on this one. The people, as a part of the panel, and for myself personally, we're coming from the perspective where we see the value of Māori wards as a part of that. So this isn't a debate. We're not going to be arguing with each other, but I suppose giving a reason for the views that we have and encouraging people to engage with the democratic process. Te Karere, your views, your understanding of the value, the importance of Māori wards?
I mean, ai marika ka tautoko here in kōrero. I'm really supportive of Māori wards and Māori voice. And one of the reasons is some of the mechanisms that we currently have do not engage well Māori communities. But this isn't just an Aotearoa issue that should be located to Māori and Tauiwi. This is a real problem throughout all Western democracies, and where Indigenous peoples or sometimes poorer communities are often underrepresented in who was able to speak up for them based on access to the polls, the desire to engage with local or central government constructs of elections, and sometimes just the ongoing cynicism that communities have with those structures.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I imagine Māori wards, I think they should be entrenched. But I can imagine a day where actually they aren't needed, when relationships are good, Māori representation is easy, and it doesn't need to be legislated. But for this time, often the Māori voice is missing within those wider mainstream contexts, especially politically. And so I think it is important to maintain it. If you do link it back theologically to the covenant that was made at Te Tiriti o Waitangi, there is a really good reason in our particular day and age, with the ongoing effects of colonialism and kind of the remnants of imperialism through the British Empire, that actually some voices are underrepresented. There was a commitment to ensure tangata Māori do have a place of representation. And so, for me, it's an easy yes.
And hey, that opportunity, I suppose, to establish a participatory democracy where everybody has a seat at the table, and this is a structure that provides that. Te Waka, just wanting to get your insight on this one. How does it work in practice to have a Māori ward? I mean, you're the expert on this one, being a Māori ward councillor. What does that look like in practice? What is the role that you have?
My role is like every other councillor. I sit at the table, I'm part of committees, I'm practically at every meeting that I need to be at. And so in terms of practicality of the mahi, it's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. But I suppose from that you bring a Māori perspective to the room that perhaps would not be there in the same way were it not for Māori wards?
Yes, you're right. And there's a heavy weight that is on your shoulders in terms of the expectation that your iwi and your hapu and your whānau, your tribe, your sub-tribes and your families actually have, as you are now representing, again, not just them, but your voice comes with a Māori perspective as you speak to the, agenda items that sit at the table.
One of the perhaps misunderstandings that people have of Māori wards and wanting to get some clarity on this, whether or not Māori ward councillors, those are elected positions, or whether they are appointed by iwi. Is that consistent in the way that is done around the country? What's your experience on that, Te Waka?
So I can only speak to the New Plymouth District Council. I know many councils have different setups with their iwi and hapu. for the New Plymouth district, you are elected. So those on the Māori roll get to choose those that put their names forward for the Māori seat, the Māori ward seat. And so so you are elected just like any other. And I guess that's a misconception that lots of our communities have, is that Māori wards are race-based, and they're not. I'm not sure if everybody knows this, but actually non-Māori can stand as a Māori ward councillor. And so, that's something that I think needs to be, there's kind of some misconceptions that people do need to understand, like that, that Māori get special treatments. No, we're exactly the same as a councillor. We get the same pay as every other councillor. Yes.
I think that is important to establish, because I think there are some misconceptions about this. Bonnie, wanting to bring you in on this one, perhaps part of the confusion is that, there is diverse ways of doing things in different councils and in different parts of the country. But actually, this is what local government is, that the local people of the area get to decide what their structure looks like. The way that it is in Taranaki may be different than what it is in Tamaki Makaurau. This is what local politics should be like, right?
Well, local politics needs to be representative of the local area. But I think one of the reasons that Māori wards have become, since the law was changed by Labour to not require the referendum if 5% of the population wanted, was that Māori were not being represented around the council table. So, there are some parts of the country where they had never had a Māori person elected to council, even though Māori had stood. So in that context, and there's many reasons perhaps why that had happened, to have a Māori ward gave a guarantee that there would be Māori voice around the table, and that we would hear that voice, and it would have the same rights and responsibilities and ability to influence things locally that other people would. So so it's an important, and councils have really taken that up. 49 councils created Māori wards. Some criticism has been, it wasn't, they didn't consult, because they didn't hold a referendum. But actually a referendum is only one way of doing consultation, and historically often not very representative in terms of who votes in those things. And a lot of councils already had relationships with Māori and Iwi and other ways of doing their consultation with the wider community. And the Māori wards have been, welcomed. And a report done when showed that actually the added value of having the Māori wards and the Māori perspective around the council table, it's been beneficial for everybody in the whole community. But unfortunately, referendum do tend to draw people with really strong views from either end of the spectrum. They don't tend to pull in the kind of more middle of the road people to participate in those things. And so historically, when they've held referendum, the Māori wards have never been agreed to.
I mean, this is a bit of a blunt instrument, the referenda, of course. And as you say, particularly on an issue where what we're looking for as an outcome is the opportunity for minority groups to participate and have a seat at the table. Referenda is just a numbers game, so that pushes in the opposite of the direction.
And it doesn't recognise the tiriti. And what was promised under the tiriti and our obligations under the tiriti, that Māori are to be part of the decision making and to be involved, and that's very strong in the tiriti. So we have to look at things a little bit differently in New Zealand when we look at how our democracy works, to make sure we are honouring what we agreed to in the treaty.
I think one of the things that sticks in people's throats a little bit, though, it's kind of like, when I was a kid, I get told to eat my vegetables. Now I really don't want to eat my vegetables, right? That if people don't have an understanding, they don't see the value of it, they feel like this is a conversation that they're not invited to be a part of, then they tend to push back on this one. Having said that, though, there are other aspects within our society where there are opportunities for special interest groups to participate in democracy at a different level. There's an opportunity for them to have a seat at the table. in some ways, Te Karere, is this another example of that making sure that Māori have a voice in this setting?
I mean, I think what's interesting around this conversation and local conversations is around some of those local boards, conversations can get quite heated because you've got iwi interests, you've got Māori interests, and when it comes into contact with, say, land, when it comes into contact with development, when it comes into contact around reframing histories, it becomes very personal. And actually, I don't think sometimes education is just the only way for people to get buy-in to doing a different thing. Because a part of communities that really do well together is around mutual flourishing. And sometimes actually the flourishing of Māori voice in this context does feel like it threatens the flourishing of other particular groups. And so I think in some ways, while I agree that education long-term is the path towards people getting on board and us moving together, the cost of not doing anything at this point is too great to Māori communities. And so in some ways, the mandated legislation is kind of an important first step as we move forward. And then, as I said, as people grow and people learn and people continue to engage with Māori communities and it becomes easier, actually it doesn't become so scary. But if I was to wait for my uncle to catch up to, some of the ideas which, we have thoroughly entrenched in our family, I'd be waiting too long and the sacrifice would be too great for some of my kids as a family example.
Exactly.
And so sometimes we do need to push ahead.
And hey, we've seen what it looks like to have a society where Māori don't have a seat at the table. We've seen the impact of that. That is a social experiment which has some absolutely awful statistics. So personally on this one, I think that this is an opportunity to redress some of that imbalance. Te Waka, I wanted to get your thoughts on this one because for some people they say, yeah, but if you mandate something, if central government, if the people down in Wellington says, hey, this is what everybody must do. I mean, mandate's got a bit of a bad reputation in recent years for some other reasons. But I suppose an opportunity to have input for this one, if we can have these conversations, if we can answer people's questions and concerns, is it better to have people on board rather than just Wellington telling people what we should do in our local areas?
Yeah, I think that's been the issue again in Taranaki. Before, when I speak to Taranaki, I mean the New Plymouth district. We have 3 councils in Taranaki. For the New Plymouth district, there was lots of noise before the Māori ward seat was established in New Plymouth. And I guess, again, just the misinformation, the misconceptions of what that might do. We haven't heard any noise in terms of me being on the council or having a Māori ward seat at the table. And so I think from a government level, the fact that they have told our community what we need to do, we had a council that agreed that they support the Māori ward, and that should be at a local level. It shouldn't be something that's mandated from the government to tell us what to do. The majority of our councillors are representatives of our community, and that's what we vote for. Therefore, we should allow the governors of the council to make those decisions for our community. Again, because we have been elected in to represent our community. And so that speaks of itself, the fact that our council was in favour of the Māori ward. And so my hope is that we've come so far as a society, we've come so far as communities in terms of building relationship. And I want to speak of that flourishing because the fact is that to have a flourishing relationship, we need to listen to each other. And I don't think that a mandate from government isn't doing that. We're not listening to each other. We're actually just being told what to do, which unfortunately we've seen that happen too much over the many years of relationship. And so I look forward to the day where we can actually listen to each other, which I think Māori wards and having a Māori voice, a guaranteed Māori voice at the table, as part of that journey around listening to each other.
And Te Waka, really appreciate your viewpoint, and so thrilled to have you as part of this panel because your lived experience is such a great example of what a positive impact Māori wards can have within a local community. So very much appreciate and value that as well. It will look different in different places, though, and for each community, depending on the balance of ethnicities within the community, depends on the views of local iwi within that community. It may look different at different places. Again, that value of saying, hey, one size doesn't necessarily fit all. The value of local politics is, as a community, we get to decide some of that. Is there value in that, Bonnie, do you think?
Absolutely. And I think, just to be clear, what's being Māori wards were never mandated. You didn't have to have one. What the previous law change did was just remove that requirement that if 5% of the population said we want to, so it was always up to local communities whether the Māori ward was the right way for them to go, and there were a few that went with different kind of partnership relationships, but many went with the Māori wards because it's a fairly straightforward way of, as you say, beginning that relationship and that discussion and making sure that voice is there. What's happening now is with this requirement for communities to vote on it is a bit of overreach from national government to local government, really. It's saying, local government, you don't really know what you're doing by doing this, and so we're going to come in and tell you how to do it. So I think what people are wanting is to say, look, leave it with the local community to decide if they want one. If they talk about it, they discuss it, and they decide that a Māori ward is the way forward for them, then that will be the right thing for that local community for that time. Whereas having government come in and say, well, we're not sure if you got that right, so we want you to test it, I think it is actually overreaching. I'm not sure what was going wrong that made people think we needed to do this. People haven't, as far as we can see, where these have been established, there's been good things happening and good discussion happening and good relationships happening. And
in some ways, to be able to say, hey, this community have already decided that this is what they want to do, but the government says, okay, we're going to ignore what the community's decided and say that the community needs to decide again. Again, problematic in that regard. Looking at, I suppose, iwi representation, and this gets complex in places like Tamaki Makaurau. Yes, there is a local iwi, but in terms of urban Māori, what that looks like is a bit more complex. To Karere, how do we, I suppose, make sure that Māori are represented in Māori wards in a place, a larger city like Tamaki Makaurau?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this is a different conversation than some of the other smaller communities who have different relationships to iwi. I mean, the council relationship with Auckland iwi, they name 19 iwi here in Auckland, but there are more iwi that put their hand up and say we were excluded from that process. So I think there are two different types of representation. There is one which is iwi representation, which is really, really important. And then there is a wider group of Māori who aren't from here that also do have a valid voice. When I say aren't from here, they may be 3-4 generations here, but their bones rest over the last 500 years somewhere else. I do think that those two different categories of people have a really important contribution to make towards local politics, towards bylaws, towards the way things flourish within Auckland. So I actually think those two things shouldn't be clumped together and they should be seen as separate or cooperative. However, at the end of the day, thinking Māori, you always want to defer to iwi in the first place as the people who were here first, and most Māori would follow those lines as well. That is one way that you should or engage with different power structures. But yeah, here it's complicated. I mean, I think it's very difficult to lay over what Auckland does to where anyone else does because of the size of the population, the amount of homelessness here, and the number of the challenges. Other than to say there isn't a single Māori voice, and there should be a multiplicity of voices and channels, which are important. I mean, a lot of people get confused or they get overwhelmed at the complexity of all the different voices, and it's like, cool, okay, yep, that is one problem, but the cost of not trying or of not pushing into the space for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years is something far greater. And so, one of the challenges that'll come in a place like Auckland, which is it's a different context for the politics that we're talking about, is it's going to be very complicated and someone's always going to be disappointed, but the cost of not pushing ahead and giving it the best shot is even worse, and that's no representation or misrepresentation.
Yeah, it is a complicated area, and I know there's the different, at times, conflicting iwi voices on particular issues. Te Waka, part of the challenge on this, though, is that people might say, oh, no, we've got representation. Te Waka, she's our Māori representation. And there's almost a tokenism aspect to it to say, I mean, to Karere's point, this is the representation, and it becomes more of a tick box exercise than saying, well, no, we need to be in relationship, we need to be in dialogue here. There needs to be many different ways in which Māori can have a voice, not just through Māori wards. Your views on that?
Yeah, I think also, just speaking of iwi, we need to remember that whānau, hapu and iwi, because often iwi are referred to as the post-settlement entities that are set up by the government. They were set up for the government. And so we need to just kind of, when we're speaking on behalf of Māori, it's kind of not just as a iwi, it's for Māori. Yes, you're right, it's complicated, and yes, I'm one voice in the mix, but I'm really proud of the New Plymouth District Council. We all collectively, majority of us are collectively in good relationship with iwi, hapu and whānau, and so that's something that we can celebrate, that the relationships there. Obviously, we're just about to have another election, so that could change with a new mayor, new governors, but we've worked lots with hapu and iwi to maintain a great relationship, to continue having consents put through faster because of the relationship. So there are pros to having good relationships with hapu and iwi, and we can see that outworked as governors within the council. And so I would encourage people to talk about that, like talk about what it means to be in good relationship with whānau, hapu and iwi, and not just having a relationship or understanding or having a viewpoint that the Māori ward representative on the council is the one voice for all Māori, because that's not the case.
No, certainly. And even in your position in New Plymouth, it's not saying, well, for all Māori in New Plymouth that you are their representative on council. No, all of the councillors are their representatives. You just bring a unique perspective to that, perhaps.
Correct. Yep, that's exactly what it is. And again, the councillors have gone out of their way to build and have relationship with different hapu, whānau and iwi. So that's a win-win for the whole community.
Yeah, certainly. Hey, just wanting to bring another objection, which I know is kicked around at the moment, and again, we're hearing some of this from central government, that local councils need to stick to the basics. They need to make sure that the roads don't have potholes and that the rubbish is collected and all of this. That there are some voices that say that this is that the Māori ward structure is an extra expense, it's an extra burden on the ratepayers, it's not council's core business. Bonnie, getting your response to that viewpoint.
Well, I think democracy is the council's core business, as it should be national government's business, and anything that strengthens our democracy and makes it more representative and therefore more effective is actually money well spent.
Yep.
It doesn't add a huge cost to a local election to have a Māori ward. I mean, we have rural wards, for example, and we're not hearing any discussion about needing to have a referendum on them, or do they cost us too much money given there aren't many people, in the rural wards. So, it's democracy. Democracy is what we need to protect, and also, the local communities really should be saying what their priorities are, and the best and most effective way for them to get to them. Because communities do have different needs. They have different infrastructure. They've got different levels of socio-economic issues, different communities with different views about what they want. So, if we're going to have a genuine local democracy where people get to decide, then we need to let that process go through. And I also think people take often a really short-term view of things.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things Māori often bring is that longer-term view. But I know someone who works for a council, and they said, look, it can be quite hard to get things through in council at times, but some of the decisions we're making are generational in their impact. It's going to be my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren who will be impacted by this. So, we need to take a longer term view and not just go, this will save us a little bit of money this year, but actually we might, the ramifications of not having these voices around the table, they could be generational.
Yeah, I mean, I think, when we talk about democracies, we can talk about the mechanisms that we use to outwork, whether it's policies or laws or ideas. But the main currency within democracies, within thriving communities, is trust.
Yeah.
And a part of council's job is to build trust again with Māori communities. What does that look like? That looks like making it as easy for people like Te Waka to say, I'm going to put my hand up. I want to put my hand up to represent people.
Yeah.
And so the trust building exercise on behalf of Māori communities, I always like to say this about Māori communities, they take a long time to move very quickly. And so whether that's business, whether that's relationship, the kind of, the period of trust building can be painful, but as soon as the communities are on board, as soon as they're there, things can happen really quickly and really, really positive relationships can happen, whether that's in business or that's in, a MOU with the local kohanga and the local school. But that trust building exercise is a thing that the Māori wards, I think, are more able to facilitate within Māori communities and the wider political structures that we have.
Hey, very much appreciate your input on this one. And hey, for people listening to this and engaging with us as well, love to get your thoughts and comments, your feedback on this issue. Of course, you may get the opportunity to vote in a referenda, but hey, let your voice be heard today as well. 8168 is the number to text. Start your message with the first word comments. Be back with more from the panel in just a moment. Te Waka, again, thank you. We've just gone to a commercial break.
Good.
And yeah, really, really appreciate what you're bringing to this. The ad break will be like the other guys can't hear you talk at the moment because of their. In on this one because I remember I was talking to you beforehand and you says, I wish that a Māori representative from the Salvation Army could have been here, but this isn't just a conversation for Māori. This is a conversation that Pākehā need to be having as well, particularly in a church setting, and I know this is why the Salvation Army are involved with this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it would have been lovely for our Māori analyst to be here, but who's done a lot of work in that. But it isn't just an issue for Māori, the Māori wards referendums. It's absolutely an issue for Pākehā. And I think the responsibility of Pākehā is to become informed and to be an informed voter. A lot of people, and to be informed from a variety of sources and reliable sources, not just, what you hear from a friend down the road who may not know anything about it, because I think there's been a lot of, myths. People can be quite fearful about things they don't understand. So it's really our responsibility as Pākehā, because we're going to be voting in the referendum, to actually be informed and to get the facts about things and to listen to different voices rather than just make up our mind, on the day, and what we might have heard from someone who's misinformed. And I also think too, you have to be a little bit honest and confront some of your fears. If you do have fears about what does this mean, what does it look like, actually go out and find out some information, talk to someone who's informed, and think about it before you just before you make your decision, because this is really important. This is about how many voices are going to be sitting around the table, and it is important in terms of, as Pākehā, how do we want to honour the treaty in our democratic processes? And we are involved in the treaty as Pākehā. It's a covenant relationship between two parties. So it is as much our issue to think about as anybody else's. And
it's so important to do that. And thank you so much for the work that the Salvation Army Social Policy Unit have done in preparing information. I know Common Grace, again, have prepared a lot of great material to be used in church settings in particular. Te Karere, is there space in the church for a diversity of views on this one? Because, hey, I appreciate I'm speaking to the Rima family. There's going to be some different views out there, and some of them have texted us through already. Can we have robust conversations, or do you think this is hey, it's quite clear from your point of view what is right and what is wrong? Can we have those tough discussions in a church setting, do you think?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, there is room for diversity and there's room for space as long as people are informed. I think that's the most important thing. I think one of the challenges of the ongoing polarization of politics inside families and churches and all community contexts is when you let fear or misinformation drive the conversation, we don't end up anywhere helpful. And so absolutely there is room for difference there. I do think, though, that there is a certain point where people need to kind of trust that good people are doing good things and we should just see where it goes. The idea that we would lay ourselves down, our lives down for other people, a call back to following in the space of Jesus and what he committed to, and that sacrifice so that other people might get some momentum is important. And my good example is female representation on boards. So I know a lot of contexts where female representation on boards was something that we're just doing this now. And now in some of those boards, there's a lot more female representation. It's an easy thing to happen now that eyes have been opened and this is kind of who we are. It doesn't need to be mandated anymore. There has been a tipping point and momentum that's happened. And so I think this is a similar conversation. Like
what you were saying beforehand, a quota is important, but hey, let's pray and work for the day where we don't need that to be the case, that we're in genuine relationship and we want everybody to be at the table. We want to invite people to be part of the conversation. Hey, we're just a few minutes away from news at 1 o'clock. Te Waka, wanting to give you the final word on this one, as people are carefully and prayerfully making decisions in the local body elections, and in particular with the referenda on Māori wards. What would you say to encourage them to support Māori wards in their local area?
I'll give you a little insight into New Plymouth. So I'm the third Māori representative on the New Plymouth District Council, the first Māori woman on the New Plymouth District Council. And so just to give you a little context around that, because I think there's a hope, and I echo the words that both Bonnie and Te Karere have said. Have conversations with people that are informed, have conversations and trust that there are good people within Māoridom that are willing to step forward and have their voice not only for Māori but for the whole community. We bring a perspective, we bring values into the mix that aren't reflected in every family every person across the country. And I think we do hold a perspective that brings life, that brings hope, and also looks to the next generation. So we aren't just thinking of today, we're thinking of generations to come. What do you want your grandchildren, your children and your grandchildren to experience as they live as a community member within their communities and see governors? What do you want them to see and feel and experience as a result of potentially your decision that you're going to make around the referendum? Is this something that you want your children and your grandchildren to experience, a real positive, hopeful, and maybe a little bit of fear, but you're actually just going to trust that maybe this is a good thing? And so I would encourage people to even just Google it. Google what is a Māori ward and actually understand what it is, as opposed to just reading and listening the rhetoric on social media.
Careful and prayerful decisions all round. Guys, thank you so much for the wisdom and grace that you've brought to this conversation today. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
That was so good. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that in and landing that so well. Really, really appreciate your participation in this and thank you.
Kia ora, kia ora.
Hey, saying kia ora. That's it. Nice to see you. You're awesome.
Kia ora. Sorry I wasn't